Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Colchester's Planning Committee on the 9th of December 2021. I'm the Deputy Chair of Planning, Councillor Robert Davidson, and I'm chairing the meeting tonight in the absence of Councillor Hazel. To begin the meeting, there are a few matters of housekeeping. A risk assessment, including COVID-19 risks, have been undertaken for this meeting. Hand sanitizer. Welcome to Councillor's Planning Committee on the 9th of December 2021. Right. Hand sanitizer, wipes and masks are available. Please use them. Masks must be worn while moving around the meeting room unless you have a medical exemption. These can be removed when seated and when addressing the committee. Action in the event of an emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm does sound, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Rumble Street. This meeting is being recorded for a live broadcast over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will also be available afterwards to view. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, and would participants please mute the microphones when not speaking. I might also add you ought to silence your mobile phones as well, or any other gadgets. That would be helpful. Introductions. Members of the committee will now introduce themselves, starting from my left. So that's you, Councillor Chua.
Sorry. I'm Councillor Helen Chua for St Anne's and St John's. Thank you.
Good evening, Councillor Lynn Barton, Shrub End Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Mike Lilly for Old Heath, The Hive and Rowhedge.
Good evening, Councillor Warnes from Beerchurch Ward.
Councillor Jarrod Oxford, substituting for Councillor Beverley Oxford, Highwoods Ward.
Good evening, Derek Loveland from Tiptree Ward. All right, subbing for I don't know who. Pauline.
Good evening, Councillor Roger Mannion, Tiptree Ward.
Councillor Jackie McLean, Marchstown Layer Ward.
Thank you very much, councillors. So we've got a full house anyway, that's good. In attendance tonight, there are planning officers, James Ryan, Nadine Calder, Chris Harden and Simon Cairns. And the Democratics officers are Richard Clifford and Matt Evans, here for procedural matters and to take the minutes. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access the meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly and set them to silent, and do not use camera or voice flash functions. We may have a break at 8 o'clock, subject to the items remaining on the agenda. There are toilets on every floor of this building and an induction loop in this room. This is a quasi-judicial committee which makes the decisions based on material planning considerations, following the laws of the land and policies of the council. If the committee is minded to refuse an application, members will use such considerations and evidence that will stand up in a court of law. The material planning considerations are listed in the committee's agenda. Item 2, substitutes. I think we've heard already, we've had Councillor Loveland for Councillor Hazel, and we have Councillor G. Oxford for Councillor B. Oxford. There are no urgent items under item 3, and declarations of interest. Are any councillors wanting to declare any interests? Councillor Oxford?
Yeah, I've been advised by Andrew Weavers that I need to declare a non-pecuniary on 7.5.
Excellent. So that means you can carry on speaking and voting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just as a precaution, I will declare that I am a director of Colchester Borough Council Holdings. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Warnes.
Chair, that would be a non-pecuniary interest, and presumably that's in relation to item 7.3.
Sorry, Richard. Was you addressing me?
Presumably that's in
Yes,
in relation to item 7.3 on Queen Street?
It is, yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. It's a non-pecuniary interest.
Good. Okay. So we now have item 5, have your say. If anyone has a petition they wish to present to me on any of the items on the agenda this evening, please do so now.
There's no indications, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. Item 6, we'd like to invite the committee to approve the minutes of the meetings on the 19th of August, the 9th of September, and the 30th of September, all in 2021. Are you agreed to agree them?
Chair, sorry, I can agree with the omission of the Beer Church Hall item, as I declared a declarable pecuniary interest on that particular item.
Is that all right, Mr. Clifford?
Yes, Chairman, that's fine. The committee as a whole have indicated their agreement to the minutes.
Excellent. Item 7, using the have your say sheet, go through the applicants one at a time. Here and that's in front of me here. Isn't it, Robert? Come on. Yeah. These ones, yeah. So we have 5 items in front of us tonight to determine. Item 1 is land to the west of the village, that's Layer de la Haye, and adjoining Birch Road, Layer de la Haye, for the construction of a photovoltaic farm. Item 2, and we have a member of the public to speak on that item, James Hartley Bond from DWD Property and Planning. Item 2, we have Chesterwell Day Nursery, Cordelia Avenue, Colchester, a mixed-use development. And no speakers on that one. Item 3, land at Queen Street, Colchester, demolition of the former bus depot buildings in preparation for planning permissions already granted. We have Dorian Kelly to speak against that, and we may have Councillor Dundas, his written submission, to be read by Mr. Clifford. Item 4 is Crown Street, Dedham, an application for a detached dwelling, and we have no speakers for that one. And item 5 is the former Colchester Rugby Club in Mill Road, Colchester, demolition of the existing clubhouse and erection of 2-storey community centre. We have Councillor Dundas's written submission to be read by Mr. Clifford, and also Councillor Oxford has indicated he'd like to speak to that one. So I believe, do any of the committee wish to draw any of those particular applications out? No? Other than item 5. Okay. We will still go through item 1, I believe, won't we? Because we have a public speaker. So,
Chairman, you have speakers on 7.1 and 7.3,
Yes.
and you're pulling out item 7.5. So therefore, you can take items 7.2 and 7.4 on block if the committee so wish.
Thank you. So item 2 is the Chesterwell Day Nursery, and item 4 is the Crown House at Dedham. Are you agreed to have those on block?
Agreed.
In that case, can I ask for an indication, those that support the recommendations? That's unanimous.
Chairman.
So both of those have been passed according to the recommendations, agreed by the recommendations. We now go on to page 3 of the procedures. The remaining applications will be discussed and determined individually using the following order. The planning officer will present it. The public speakers will then have up to 3 minutes with a bell at 2 minutes to speak on that application. We have no visiting councillors apart from Councillor Dundas, who's got written submissions today. So that's the order of proceedings. And I suggest the rules of debate. Do I have to read those out?
No, Chairman, if we can just proceed to item 7.1 now.
Excellent. So we now go to item 1, which is land to the west of the village and adjoining Birch Road, Layer de la Haye, construction and operation of a photovoltaic farm and associated infrastructure, including inverters, security cameras, fencing, access tracks, and landscaping. Mr. Ryan, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll just share my screen. So, thank you very much, Chair. We're here to have a look at item 7.1, which, as you described, is the construction of a solar farm to the west of Layer de la Haye, between Layer and Birch. So this is a large application site, as you can see, 96.8 hectares, not all of which is being developed, but that's the wider site, which you can see there. Just try and highlight that around there. So parcel here, the southern parcel, and then the cable run, which goes in the road. So will be a trench dug in the road and then backfilled and resurfaced all the way down to the Abberton substation down here. These are the development zones. I won't concentrate on this because it's I've got better drawings, to be honest. So this is an indicative drawing. All the drawings I'm going to show you today are indicative. The scheme is EIA development, so it's come with an environmental statement, and developments of this nature tend to be assessed under something called the Rochdale envelope, which is a system where effectively the environmental impact assessment and the environmental statement that came with that assesses the worst case scenario in terms of impacts, and that means that the developers can do less, i.e. they could construct less panels and put in more planting, for example, but the scheme is assessed in terms of its visual impact, for example, on the worst case scenario. So these are the areas where panels are proposed. The red line here is the scheduled ancient monument. The section inside the site was not a scheduled ancient monument at the start of the application period, but a significant amount of archaeological work was done throughout the application period. And once that was submitted, Historic England applied to have that section scheduled as well. So now the scheduled ancient monument has been extended. There were panels on this side, and as agreed with initially with Historic England, a buffer zone was going to be put either side, but following the scheduling of the ancient monument, that whole section was removed, though it's still in the site, so that will become managed grassland for the benefit of the setting of that monument. The parcels can broadly be seen as the northern parcel, northwestern parcel. There's a bridleway / footpath that runs up between the two here, which is a well-used footpath, quite well surfaced. The applicants are putting in a permissive footpath along this boundary here, which will set the panels back a fair bit as well. So there'll be a footpath for the public to use. The substation will go in here and will be accessed by the power company once it's been adopted in this access here. Right through the centre of the site, where my cursor is now, is the pathway that will take vehicles through and will access the site once during the construction phase and once the site is fully constructed in terms of maintenance. The lines you can see that crisscross the site are existing easements for mains water, and there's a power line that crosses the site across here. The main inward ingress access will be this point here, and vehicles will move through the site and will only in the construction phase will only exit the site at this access point here. This area here, once again, pull way back off of the layer road. This has been dedicated to be a skylark compensatory habitat, because on site skylark, which are a farmland breeding bird, has been assumed, so they're dedicating this area of the site to be managed specifically for skylarks. So that's the kind of zoomed in version of the north area of the site, showing the scheduled ancient monument, the planting belt that's going in as requested by Historic England, so 4 metre planting belt along there, so there's about 50 metres of space between the fence and the planting belt. So if you do get the opportunity to view the monument, it will be against the backdrop of planting. It's quite hard to see on site, to be perfectly honest. It's a gentle depression, I think I'd describe it, but it's there. Currently it's cropped, so you really can't see it. One of the benefits of the scheme Historic England have picked out is that as this will be managed, it'll be slightly easier to potentially see. Though it's still going to be quite difficult to see, to be honest, because it is just a gentle depression, really. You can see these banks of planting that are going all around. Permissive footpath along here. Any hedges are being gapped up. There's planting virtually surrounding the entirety of the site. That's the skylark area I was talking about. Access point in here. Extra planting around there, all around the site effectively. Planting on this boundary as well. Planting, this is quite a strong hedge along this section of footpath here already, and then it breaks down to be gappy and then non-existent to this end, so is being improved all the way along with planting. The land actually rises up to about this point here from the reservoir. Then this is almost the kind of crest that you walk along on the public footpath, and the land actually gently undulates downwards across the site in this direction, which is good in terms of visual impact. I'll show you some LVIA drawings in a minute, so that will highlight that. And this is a indicative drawing as well, showing the landscaping in slightly clearer terms, but we can go back to that if anyone has any questions. I'll whiz through these because these are also indicative drawings of the construction phase, showing the various elements of the proposed build. Slightly zoomed in version of the compound in here, which will be a small substation. That's a swept path analysis showing the lorry movements in construction phase. There's another one. There's some basic drawings of the indicative drawings of the plant that will go in around the substation compound. So got a metering room. That's the security camera. Standard post. This is the kind of deer fencing that will be used throughout. Kind of 2 metre high, gaps for mammals, CCTV cameras around. Again, most of it will not be particularly visible because there'll be screening all around it. And this will be on the inside of the screening. It's just a cross section of the cables, be they on site or in the road. That's the cross section of the access road that will run through the site. More fencing. That's one of the units that will be set between the panels, one of the inverter cabinets, basically a shipping container. Again, they're all located right centrally within the site, so very little visual impact. It's a cross section of the panels. The scheme has been assessed with panel height of a maximum of 2.8 metres. I think on one of the I incorrectly said 2.7 at 2.5 of the report. Everywhere else throughout the report it says 2.8. It has been assessed at 2.8. The 2.7 was a typo. So 2.8 is the maximum height. Obviously, the majority of the panel is significantly lower than that because they taper, or they're angled. This is the indicative drawing of the compound for the substation, so transformers and electrical bus bars, kind of thing you'd expect to see in a substation. And then from there, the cable run will head down the road. Plant cabinet. So you're going to show you some drawings now. They're kind of panoramic drawings from the LVIA. Some of them have got a wireframe drawing underneath. Some of them are photo montages. I'll explain them as we go through. Now, this is the one with the monument in it. This was pre the removal of this first set of panels, which you can see down here. So in visual terms, what will be seen now, before the planting goes in, will be these panels in the distance here. You see my cursor in that corner there. All of these have actually been removed. This is a wireframe showing another northern corner of the site, the top of that bridleway. And that is a photo montage showing, without any mitigation, upon completion, what the panels would look like from that angle. So you can see the panels here. A lot of the montages I'm going to show you are very difficult to pick up any visual impact. The idea of the design has been very carefully driven by the LVIA to ensure that they are put in places where they're not particularly visually impactful. But this one is one where you can see at completion. That is the palisade fence running down the back of the pumping station. And this funny little line here is the wireframe of where you'll be able to see panels in the distance, so quite a long way away. This is another viewpoint showing that you simply won't see any panels even with existing planting. This is another wireframe from the back of beyond where Layer Hall is, and again the wireframe without the landscaping set below. And this is a montage showing the panels. They are there. They are quite distant. That's at the footpath junction, so you can just about make them out. So that is that's at completion. That's with the landscaping in at year 5. So virtually, you can just about make out some panels in there. And that's at year 25. This is a 40-year permission, so it's a temporary consent, but a long one. Here's another wireframe drawing across the site from the main road running up from the reservoir into Layer. This is at completion. You can just about see the panels there. So that's the kind of distance we're talking about. It's a fair way off the road, even without any mitigation having gone in. So that's the view at year 5. So panels not readily visible at all. And at 25, the trees and hedges are just larger. The large pylons are already in place. They're existing. So this is taken from the footpath, the relatively recently constructed footpath that runs down the side of the reservoir at the bottom of the hill. So as I was saying, that's the hedge I was talking about. Starts off quite strong here, ends up slightly gappy, then breaks completely. But that runs almost along the ridgeline, so the development will be set beyond that. So the panels are there, but you can't really make them out. And at 5 years, the planting is significantly stronger, so all you can really see is planting on the ridge. And at 25 years, the trees are broken through where the trees, decent tree species have been put inside the hedge, and no panels visible. This is taken from I don't know if you've been to the Essex Wildlife Trust Reserve at Abberton, but there's an elevated mound there, and this LVIA shot is taken from there. I'll whiz through this. So that's at completion. Very difficult to pick out any visual impact at all. That's at year 5, where their own planting on the reserve is growing, and on the next one, you can't see anything at all because the copse that they planted has become semi-mature. This is taken from Birch Street, so from the village of Birch, and the wireframe shows the kind of position of the panels. They are a long way off. This is at completion. They are in there, but they are a long way away. That's at 5 years, and at 25 years, you can barely make them out. This is from Chestnut Field in Gospex. It was a potential viewpoint that was picked up, but of very limited consequence. This might potentially be one of the most important viewpoints. This is the kind of crossroads where you come from the bottom of the bridleway here. You might recognise this finger post. This is the split between the two main north parcels. So this wireframe shows where the panels will go. You will see the panels upon completion. This position here is where so you've got the footpath, Sus-Trans route and the bridleway running up there. A permissive footpath is going in along this boundary here in front of the, in front of the planting and in front of the fence. So that's at year 5. Still see some glimpses of panels, undoubtedly. At 25 years, well screened and a pleasant permissive footpath to use. This is a wireframe facing pretty much from a very similar location, but having turned round facing towards the south of the site, the southern parcel. So you can see some panels in here. On completion. On 5 years, some screening has gone in. And at 25 years, further screening. But there are still some views, because of the undulation of the land, you can just about make out the panels from that position. This is the northwestern parcel from a position to the south, and the wireframe below. And this is another one from Garland's farm. That's the wireframe overlaid on that previous photo. So you can just about make out in the distance some panels, and the same from similar location but turned facing west. This is from School Hill and Birch, again very barely perceptible at this kind of distance. And that's with the panels in from School Hill Birch. I've got many, many other photos, which I won't take you through now, because I think you've seen plenty. If there are any particular questions relating to any of those viewpoints, I can go through those, but I think I'll just revert back to the site drawing. Ooh. And then I'll quickly take you through the scheme. Some key points for questions. So there's a few key points I really wanted to make. This scheme's been through a long period of pre-application with officers and also with Historic England, mindful of the Scheduled Ancient Monument. It was submitted in very late last year, and there's been a significant amount of work that's taken place in terms of archaeology throughout the application period. Our in-house archaeologists requested 1% trial trenching of the entire site. So on a almost 100-hectare site, that's almost a hectare of trial trenching pre-determination. So that's a very, very significant amount of work that's taken place. 3% more has been requested by condition due to the potential archaeological sensitivities. Apart from the area around the SAM, very little was found, but there is still potential just due to the size of the area. In terms of the Scheduled Ancient Monument itself, it's probably one of the key features on the site. And I mentioned before, as I said before, the panels that were in this section here have been removed to improve the setting significantly. And once the planting is in place, you will see the SAM against the juxtaposition of the hedgerow, which is exactly what Historic England requested. In terms of the planning benefit, they've also requested an interpretation board to be located on the public right-of-way that's quite near this boundary. I think they and officers see that as a significant benefit of the scheme, because at the moment it's difficult to interpret. Unless you were a scholar of such matters, you probably wouldn't know that much about the Scheduled Ancient Monument without some interpretation. So by achieving a on-site interpretation board that will at least kind of tell the story, which is so important with this sort of archaeology. Apart from that, as I noted at the start, there's significant planting all the way around the site. That planting has led to a canopy cover increase of 135%. So I think around 0.75 of a hectare of additional tree planting. So that in its own right is a really significant benefit. 85% biodiversity net gain on this scheme, which is, we've got an emerging plan requirement of 10%, and we've got 85% here. So that is, again, a significant benefit. The permissive footpath is a link that parish councils requested and was put in, so that's a further benefit of the scheme. In terms of the cable run, that will come out of the compound here and run right along the road, but that is wholly within the road. So that will be, a licence will be requested from Essex County Council should permission be granted, and that will be dug and filled as it goes along the road. So the idea is to have minimum level of disruption. That's something the applicants have been really keen to stress. I suppose the overall picture is that this is a scheme of significant energy generation. It can power potentially 16,000 homes in the district at virtually zero carbon once operational. The council has declared a climate crisis, as we all know, and the existing adopted plan, the emerging Section 2, the adopted Section 1 local plan, the emerging Section 2 local plan, and of course national guidance in the MPPF strongly look to promote development of this nature if its impacts can be mitigated, and officers believe it can be. It will be a really real and tangible benefit to the council's zero carbon aims, and also will provide additional energy security, which is important, obviously. Never been more important. So the scheme, on balance, whilst has some visual impacts and other impacts as set out in the detailed report, is commended to you for a recommendation of approval. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan. The illustrative pictures were very helpful, and certainly in 25 years' time, we'll all be a lot older, but hopefully we can, as you say, screen most of the industrial views. Have any of the panel got any questions?
Chairman, you have your say, Speaker.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. We have a supporter, Mr. James Hartley Bond. If you'd like to come up to the table, you have 3 minutes, and a bell will sound after 2.
Thank you, Chairman, councillors. Just one point of clarification. Sorry for any confusion. My name's James Hartley Bond. I'm actually from the applicant, so I am from Low Carbon. I'm the head of project development at Low Carbon. We commend your officer on his thorough and considered report. We're grateful to receive a positive recommendation, and we feel this is testimony to the following: a continuous evolution of the proposal to mitigate any technical issues, a considered approach to the layout to minimise the impact on key public and private receptors. Consequently, no objections from any technical consultees, including matters such as landscape impact, ecology, heritage, highways, and many others. And finally, following the establishment of important and respectful relationships with the parish councils, we believe we also have their support for the proposal. Aside from generating enough clean electricity to power over 16,000 homes in the borough, it is creating an 85% biodiversity net gain, as you've heard from your officer, and also delivering a new permissive right-of-way, again, which you've heard, at the request of the parish councils. So with that, I'd like to turn our attention to why the proposal really matters. It has unlikely escaped people's attention that we're currently fighting a climate crisis and an energy crisis at the same time. In the last 2 months, we've had commitments from COP26, plus a raft of new announcements from the government to bring forward measures to tackle climate change. One of the most significant is a commitment to fully decarbonise our electrical system by 2035, which requires projects such as these to come forward. As your officer notes in his conclusion, this project could be argued to be the most significant step towards fighting climate change that the borough has been offered to date. The second crisis is the huge rise in wholesale gas prices, which we have little control over as the supply and price is largely determined by foreign entities. We're only seeing the start of this impact on people's energy bills. Energy security is going to become much more important. This project aids in solving both of these crises, decarbonisation and energy security. Councillors, you have before you today a well-received project with officer and consultee support that can make a huge difference to both of these crises. I urge you to support your officer's recommendation and approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hartley-Bond. So we can now open it up to discussion on the panel. Councillor Warnes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask some questions in relation to mitigations, if that's possible. Would the colouring of the shipping light containers that will be on the site, I believe for what are called inverters or something, are they likely to be required to be sympathetic to the landscape? It talks about deer fencing. Could you explain that a little bit more to me? And if this is to keep out wildlife, how will that be sympathetic to the Wildlife and Country Act 89 so as not to snare or snag wild animals and cause suffering? And could you expand a bit more about how the police recommendation is going to be addressed for there to be microphones on the cameras, because their advice was that a development of this scale is likely to attract a degree of criminality. And the idea was that microphones would allow interaction, I presume, with people that might be trying to breach and intrude on the boundary. And is it possible to condition the hedge planting that is to buffer the ancient scheduled monument to be as early as is practically possible? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Yes, I will go through as an order. Yes, the inverter cabins will be, they're very, very centrally located within the panels, because they feed the cable, they are connected to the cables that the panels deliver their electricity to. So they are, but you won't really see them because they're only slightly higher than the top edge of the panels anyway, but we will ensure they are, we're asking for full details of their elevations in significantly more detail than the drawings I showed you before. So we certainly will ensure their colour is a discrete one. The deer fencing, that's a great question. It is basically stock-proof fencing, but it has gaps. So sheep, for example, can't pass through it because they may wish to graze sheep amongst the panels, for example. But it does have small holes along the bottom to allow animals, smaller mammals, for example, to pass in and out. Yes, the police were concerned, and I have discussed this with the applicant. In terms of the landscape visual impact assessment, we are very keen on not having anything more surrounding these panels than the 2 metre high, relatively lightweight agricultural style deer fencing. We don't want anything stronger. We don't want palisade fencing or anything like that, because that would be terrible in the landscape. The police would obviously prefer something more substantial, but we don't think that's appropriate. I don't think we concur that this is, with the police, that this is likely to generate antisocial behaviour or criminality particularly. It's something that we would rather defer to the applicants on because it will be their assets effectively. We have discussed effectively the applicants are happy with the CCTV cameras that they use usually and that they have approved, that they have proposed. And on balance, we think that the scheme is acceptable on that basis. We would obviously prefer to see as little technology on the boundaries as possible for landscape impact terms. Yes, the scheduled ancient monument planting will absolutely be prioritised. There's a condition is suggested for a landscape management plan, so that will set out how the landscaping will be. We've got plans for the actual landscaping itself, so we'll get a very detailed set of drawings of exactly what species will go where, and that is proposed to be a 4-metre planting belt in front of the fence, then a buffer, then the SAM, and we will certainly make sure that that is one of the first elements brought forward, because the setting of the SAM is as it runs through the site, is the most important part, to be perfectly honest. So I'll certainly, in fact, if that is something that members feel strongly about, I can certainly suggest an informative to ensure that they deal with that from the in the landscape management plan very explicitly.
Right. We have Councillor McLean, followed by Councillor Mannion.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this type of renewable energy. It is so important now that we think in this line of thought. I think we need to be more proactive in it, and I think another item which would be really helpful if we could visit some of the existing sites to actually get a feel of how they are producing the energy and how they are set out, because there's one at Abberton. I went to one near Cambridge, and there's one at Kelvedon. We should maybe as a committee visit some of these sites to get a handle on it. I think where Councillor Warnes was concerned about the fencing, I think that's going to work for the animals in both ways, really, for their safety, because they can be very destructive, especially deer. So I think that would help to have the fencing. It's important you actually look after them, because they could really harm themselves. And I think it's going to just blend in. We will get used to it. It is a change, but we have got to think on this renewable energy and move forward. So if we could start putting these in place, see how they work, we will then progress and get so much better. I am the local councillor for that area, and I would like to recommend that we accept this application with all the recommendations and with all the improvements, and working with the council officers to make this second to none, very productive and great based on the renewable energy. So I would like to propose this, please, as is in the agenda.
Thank you very much, Councillor McLean. Councillor Mannion, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say that I actually agree with this proposal. I think that EV power sourcing is absolutely essential. However, I would agree with Councillor Warnes, in fact, of the safety of the site. It's in the middle of nowhere. It has absolutely no protection for high-value panels and electrical kit of all sorts. There will be no guard or no viewing of this, because the CCTV at the moment, as I understand it, is infrared CCTV. The police themselves have actually said they wish to have monitored CCTV. They ask, in fact, to have that microphone and speaker function attached to each camera for real-time interaction. I would be very concerned. The security aspect of this is really desperate, I think, in places, and needs to be rethought through. I know it's going to cost money for the developer, but unfortunately, that's the price one has to pay for having proper security and not having a loss of facilities caused by criminality, the police call it, on the site. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments, please, for Mr. Ryan. Just wonder what sort of timescale, how long will it take to actually complete this project? And also, I'd agree with Councillor Warnes in that actually the hedging, because it's on the outside of the scheme, could actually be planted almost this autumn, this winter, and that will at least give it a year's start and start shading the works. The other thing I was going to ask was the footpath that has been granted or agreed, that's on the site of these panels, but the landowner also owns the land to the edge of the waterworks where the palisade fencing was. And I think it would be very helpful because it's a rat run, that Birch Road. It's not wide enough for a footpath. It's barely wide enough for 2 cars. And I just wonder whether there's any way of negotiating with the landowner because of the value of this site to him, whether that footpath could be extended all the way to the edge of the waterworks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. With regards to the security, I think we simply have to defer to the applicants. We have discussed this with them. They run sites elsewhere all over the country, and they just don't have problems in that respect. It's their kit, it's their investment, and they just don't see the need for more stringent security in terms of monitored CCTV or CCTV microphones, that kind of thing. It would be unreasonable to force that kind of approach on them because it's their scheme ultimately. I can't say any more than that. In terms of the planting, I think as I set out before, we will certainly push to get as much planting put in as possible, as soon as possible, but we have to be mindful that it will effectively be a construction site for a while the panels are being brought in by a lorry. So it's usually you would expect the panels to go in, the fencing to go round, and then the planting to go in. But I think particularly where the Scheduled Nature Monument is, there might be potential to get the hedging put in earlier. But I'll certainly make a note through the landscape management plan that we will try and get as much planting put in as soon as possible. Because obviously the sooner, you're absolutely right, as soon as it goes in, the sooner it will start to take and the sooner it will eventually mature. So it's a great point. Whether that's actually possible in construction terms, I'm not sure, but it may be possible in some parts and not possible in others. The construction phase really does depend on the contractor and and a multitude of other elements, but once they get going, it should be relatively quick, I think, once they get going, but maybe 16 weeks, something like that, potentially, but it's, I may be wrong. But I can, if it's really essential, I'll pour through my report, because I'm sure it's in there. Hold on.
Councillor Warnes.
Thank you, Chair. I really do. I hear what James is saying, and I respect James's viewpoints. I do, however, think the protection of the ancient schedule monument, which has been discovered and scheduled for its importance, even though some may view it as just a dip in the landscape, it is what it is, which is an ancient scheduled monument. And I would like to see, where at all practical, some firming up of the conditions given to require the earliest planting possible around the ancient scheduled monument. It's not beyond the wit of man, I think, to be able to actually make that happen for the hedging facing the monument to actually go in first, even though I understand that it often goes in last. I'd like to see that. I do think that Councillor Mannion is right about emphasising the security, and I'm sure the police would not be making such recommendations unless they felt it was important, and it would be them that would obviously have to police it. You wouldn't have a private police force employed by the developers to actually police it. They would be looking for the public purse to actually do that for them. And so if there were pilfering actually go on, and that was to cause interruptions to, you know, the supply for the sake of us conditioning microphones, which in these days need not be visually intrusive and not indeed bulky. So if Councillor Mannion wants to propose that microphones are actually a condition, I would be happy to actually second that. Thank you.
Do you mind if I could just quickly come back? I'm absolutely happy to support a condition to deal with the planting for the SAM up front. Absolutely happy to take that, and I think the applicants would accept microphones if that's a happy medium. So CCTV with built-in microphones, I'm sure they will do that if members are think that is absolutely necessary.
Is that acceptable, Councillor Warnes?
Yeah, I would like to emphasise the point. I can't see the police making that recommendation unless they thought it was a necessary one, and they are the policing professionals. So I would defer to them. I'd be interested to know what Councillor Mannion's opinion is. Thank you.
Yes, but Mr. Ryan is offering the microphones to be installed.
I mean, I'm fine with it, but Councillor Mannion has also emphasised it. How does he feel about a happy medium, which I assume is asking the developer whether they are willing to provide them?
No, sorry, we will impose, if members want that, we will impose a condition requiring microphone security system to be installed.
Okay, I would personally be happy with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I think that is probably not a bad idea. However, there also comes down to the fact that we're talking about deer fencing, which, to be fair, is not very substantial. And I take the point about the environment and how it looks, but at the end of the day, there's a high a lot of financial investment in this particular project, and it is likely to be attacked, I use those words advisedly, by some criminality. And we can laugh and we can sort of giggle or whatever. There was a case in question with a high voltage area on the way to Southend, where two criminals actually walked into the high voltage area, and they got killed because they were cutting the copper from this thing, and it was live. Now, if the stupidity of that sort of action can happen there can be simple things happening in a place like this, in totally isolated. So I really would like to see better security fencing around this site. I take Councillor Warren's point about having the microphones would be a good way, but it also needs mics and speakers. The idea is that a monitored CCTV system actually talks to or sees something going on, will talk to the miscreants and tell them, get off this site, and they have the ability to talk back. It's not just microphones, it's the whole thing together. And as I say, I do support this scheme, but I think this security could be a real issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I think we've got a useful compromise from Mr. Ryan, and the police at the end of the day are not, they are statutory consultee, but they are already recommending microphones and speakers. We might include speakers.
We can include microphones and speakers, absolutely.
Yep. Thank you. Good. Mr. Ryan, you didn't answer my suggestion about extending the footpath, the permissive footpath.
I'm under the impression that land has been compulsory purchased by the Water Authority, because that is hence why there's a gap taken. It appears as if there's a gap taken out of the site almost. There's a large area where there are no panels and doesn't sit within this site. So I don't think that would be possible. It's certainly not within this site, so it's certainly not something that we could provide as part of this application, unfortunately.
That's very helpful, and I'm sure when the water company put a planning application in, we will consider it.
We will.
So can we put this to the vote, please? Is that all right? So all... Oh,
Sorry, Chair,
we've
could
had a proposal from Councillor McLean. Can we have a seconder? Oh, yep.
I would like to reaffirm my proposal with the proviso of the cameras, the speakers, the whole works, whatever, to go forward. Okay, so I'd like to do just to reiterate that I'm including that as well.
Thank you, but we need a seconder, and we've got Councillor Barton seconding it. So all those in favour of the application? That's unanimous.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan. Right, we now go on to item three. Which is land at Queen Street, Colchester, demolition of the former bus depot buildings in preparation for planning permissions already granted under by CBC. So we have Mr. Cairns presenting and Mr. Kelly against. Would you like to wait for Mr. Cairns to present, and then you'll be able to have your 3 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just getting to the point in the presentation. Apologies.
I just wonder, Mr. Clifford, while we're waiting, whether we could hear Councillor Dundas's written submission.
Chair, I think it's probably best to wait to get the officer presentation first before we do the councillor and public submissions.
Right, good evening, members, and apologies for the delay in just setting that up. We have before us this evening an application seeking the demolition of the former bus depot buildings in Queen Street in preparation for the implementation of extant planning permissions granted under applications reference 182120 and more recently 202780 on land at Queen Street in Colchester. So I'll just share my screen if I may. Right, here we have a slide. Oh, good. Excellent, apologies, Chair. Yeah, here we have a slide which shows the application site area in its totality. As you will see, it includes principally the bus station buildings fronting Queen Street, together with the shed, which forms the rear portion of that building. And you will see the close relationship with the historic town wall and the listed building to the north of the site. So here we've got an overhead image, which I think more clearly shows the extent area of the built form to be removed. As you'll see, it is the interwar bus station buildings fronting Queen Street with the well-known white rendered, brick and render facade to Queen Street, which stretches back in a very linear fashion, a number of ranges of sheds, together with a small number of garages to the rear of the what is now known as the Creative Business Centre, the former police station buildings in Queen Street, which are also listed buildings. So again, a closer up image showing the buildings at oblique angles. As you could see, the buildings have no particular architectural historic merit, but conditions are proposed within the condition schedule for recording of the existing structures. And here we have a closer up image of the main Queen Street facade. As you'll see, it's extremely utilitarian in nature, with large gates formerly to admit buses to that built form. Internally, the buildings are constructed mainly of steel frame with a concrete slab throughout, asbestos sheet cladding, and some very limited areas of modern brickwork, absolutely typical of their period. And further views through those ranges of sheds, you see they are extensive and extremely utilitarian in their form. On the right-hand side of those images, Chair, you will see the structure is rather precariously balanced along the top leading edge of the historic town wall. And again, a further image showing the interior of the building, relationships with adjacent walling, and the extremely lightweight nature of the construction. Here we have a view from Priory Street, showing the roof structure in context with the historic town wall. As you'll see, there is a section of later brickwork on top of the town wall, which will not be removed by these proposals, together with a clear story glazed frieze, and the roof of the shed is then seen above. As you'll see, it's in very close relationship to the bastion on the wall, which is a medieval fortification added to the earlier wall structure. And then we have a view from within the site showing the range of buildings to the rear of the Creative Business Centre, together with the extreme rear range of the bus station buildings as they project into the former yard area of the bus station. Very detailed provision and consideration has been given to the protection of the historic wall during the removal process. This has formed part of monument consent granted by Historic England, so that consent is now in place and the works could now proceed. So again, more detailed measures just to show you the level of consideration that has been given to protection of the wall during the demolition process. It's not part of this site. And this image shows you the rear of the approved building, which is again for business startups and has received substantial public grant aid. This is the building here. At the centre of the screen, the gabled structure, which this view is obviously from Priory Street car park. And here, just as a reminder, Chair, is the approved elevation of the replacement structure, which already benefits from planning permission granted by this committee. And this shows the phasing pattern for the proposed works, which ensures that the impact of the removal of the structures on adjacent existing structures is given very careful consideration to avoid any detriment to those buildings occurring. Thank you, Chair. If members have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them. I understand that you have a speaker, and so I'll hand you over to the speaker, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cairns. So, Mr. Kelly, if you'd like to come forward, you have 3 minutes, a bell after 2.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak at relatively short notice. I'm formatting this as an objection, although to be fair, I would be perfectly happy to see this demolition proceed, but for technical reasons, as the planning officer's report correctly points out, the part of the demolition has been effectively approved already by the inspector after appeal, under the general heading that includes the words demolition of existing buildings. However, this does not apply to the front part of the garage. Now, I presume that the primary reason for this particular application is to piggyback the demolition of the back section, provisionally owned by Alumno Limited or their nominees, with the demolition of the front of the half of the building owned by CBC, ready for their development of the business units, which I'm on record as supporting. On the face of it, this is a sensible money-saving exercise, but these are two completely separate and legally unconnected developments by two different developers, one of which involves public funds. So I can't see how a single planning permission can be awarded to two separate entities for two separate developments unless there was a formal relationship between them, which doesn't appear to be the case. Nor is there any indication of how the costs are to be split. Where public money is involved, this needs to be clarified. There are also very different rules for an application by the council to itself, even if an application is from a wholly owned company. So you can't apply two different standards to one application. So I want to suggest that this is referred back pending further information and a separate application is made just for the front part of the garage. I'm sure that with the two separate permissions in place, the actual work can be carried out just by agreement without any problem. I might also just briefly say in the ecology report and the methodology statement, there is no mention at all of the known stag beetle population, although they mention birds, they mention pigeons, they mention flora, but not stag beetles. So I'd like that added as a condition that the stag beetles be taken into account. There's no mention of the requirement to make sure that the contractors main access throughout the demolition to the flats, private car parks to the north of the site. There's provision for maintaining access to the back of 37 Queen Street, but not to the private houses. And there's a contradiction within the methodology statement as to whether the ground slabs at the front part of the bus garage are going to be removed or not. Whether they are or not, there must be a written constraint, 10 seconds, about deploying heavy demolition equipment on top of the underground Roman remains, which could cause considerable damage. So I'd ask you to condition that too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kelly. You've raised quite a few important points, so hopefully Mr. Cairns can answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to run through those points. This application relates to the whole of the bus station sheds that remain, and that is in effect for quite the opposite reason that I think the objector opined to, insofar as it means that this scheme is not contingent on Alumno's proposals. It actually enables the whole of the building to be demolished, because it's not possible structurally to demolish part of a shed, as you probably well know, Mr. Chair. For that reason, we need to be able to press ahead with the demolition, and that is facilitated by this standalone consent that is solely sought by the Borough Council to demolish the remaining bus station buildings. It would be impractical to do otherwise. And I do think it is regrettable, possibly, that the description does refer to 182120, because in effect, this consent would have quite the opposite effect, in that it actually frees the redevelopment by the Borough Council of the frontage from, it decouples it from that development. So I think hopefully that should reassure those concerns. In terms of the stag beetle matter, a detailed ecological report was commissioned. I think I showed you the rather inhospitable environment that exists within the sheds. In terms of stag beetles, you are dealing with a steel, brick and concrete structure. As far as I'm aware, stag beetles require decomposing hardwood that's generally buried in the ground. This is quite not that sort of environment, as I think we clearly demonstrated from the slides. So I think we have no justification to request anything in connection with stag beetles, because we have no evidence or even likely suggestion that there are any within this structure. The application doesn't imply or require any restriction to the rights of way that exists to the properties fronting East Hill and Queen Street to the north of the vehicular access to the rear. So to reassure on that front, there would be no need to impose a condition, because there would be no justification in providing any obstruction to those rights. There is a very detailed method statement that accompanies this application, and it doesn't imply or require any obstruction to those rights of way, which would clearly have to be dealt with in detail as detailed matters with those occupiers who have those prescriptive rights. So hopefully, Mr. Chairman, I've dealt with those concerns in some detail. Everything within the site is to be removed. I think Mr. Kelly had concerns about some slabs. The whole of the frontage is obviously to be cleared and developed for the scheme which you've already approved, members. So there is nothing that would remain. And the method statement for demolition does take into account very carefully the impact on the important archaeology beneath the site, and there are relevant archaeological conditions both upon this proposed consent and on the consent for the redevelopment of the site in terms of its built form. And indeed, monument consent has been granted, which obviously addresses any potential impacts in relation to the nationally important town wall. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Cairns. I did notice there is an archaeological watching brief over this, and forgive me, demolition contractors probably don't have the best reputation, do they? They have to be safe, but they're normally very speedy. And I just wonder, would it be unreasonable just to put a condition on there to ensure that access was maintained for all the properties? It would be, at least that it would be absolutely clear to the contractors that was a condition. Thank you. And as far as the stag beetles go, I'm concerned that Mr. Kelly seemed to think that they have been there. I understand that they need wood to eat to survive, and we haven't seen any evidence of wood. But would it take long to actually just do a very quick assessment of the site and just be reassured that there was no danger to any wildlife?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in terms of the maintenance of access, we can impose an informative for that reason to confirm that this consent doesn't imply or grant any restriction to any existing rights of way. In terms of the stag beetles, we have undertaken, or the applicants have undertaken, an ecological report on the site. And had there been any evidence of stag beetles or a suitable habitat, I'm sure they would have recommended relevant mitigation. There is a continuous concrete slab within the buildings, and the walls are a combination of steel and brick. There really is, I think, little or no likelihood of stag beetles within the structures. So I think, Mr. Chair, I think it would be pointless to require another ecological survey, because that work has been undertaken during the appropriate season and would otherwise delay the works considerably, because we would have to wait until the summer months when stag beetles were active or emerged from their hidey holes. Clearly at this time of the year, I'm sure they're well tucked up beneath the soil level. But in this instance, as there is no soil for them to be tucked up within the built form, and we have carried out ecological survey reports, I think that probably would be unreasonable. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, no, I'd agree with that, thank you. Councillor Barton, you wanted to speak?
Yes,
Sorry, Chair, before we proceed, we have the statement from Councillor Dundas.
We do.
Oh, sorry.
Carry on, Mr. Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. This is the written submission from Councillor Dundas. I would like to state my support for this application. The appointment of a contractor and final permission to begin demolition is the first stage in the completion of the Grow On Hub, which is a significant investment in the area by the Council. It leverages in 4.45 million in external funding, and the digital connection forms part of the Town Deal Fund, for which the business cases are being completed at the moment. If the project does not start coming to fruition soon, then this funding may be in danger. I know it has been mooted by some that it would be nice in some way to retain all or part of the building, as it plays a significant part in Colchester's history, a view I have some sympathy with. However, having viewed the building myself, it is clearly beyond any sort of repair or refurbishment and is now in a very poor condition indeed. To be clear, despite the boundary lines drawn showing a wider site, this permission relates to the bus garage only. It does not relate or contain anything to do with the wider area, the wall or other access. Members may wish to satisfy themselves by querying it with officers. This application is necessary because the demolition, which was previously planned to be performed either by or as a joint exercise with another developer working on a project nearby, is now being brought in-house and being carried out under contract to CBC, only making it no longer dependent on third parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's useful information. Councillor Barton, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I understand embedded in the building is this tiled street sign, which shows that Queen Street was formerly called Southgate Street, and it is on our local list, and therefore that means that list was compiled by residents and is valued by them. And as I was on the Cabinet at the time and instrumental in getting that local list established, I'm particularly keen that we respect the list. So from that point of view, it says it's going to be removed safely, but who will oversee that? Because I'm thinking back to the fire station when the builders went in there, the war memorial plaque disappeared for some years, and it took ages for one particular resident to trace it and get it situated now in the town hall, so it's forever safe in our hands. So I wonder if there's any further information on reinstating the sign, where it will be reinstated and who's going to remove it and keep it safe for the period of the development. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very grateful to Councillor Barton for having raised this. I would direct members to the amendment sheet where there are a number of revised planning conditions. I suggest to address the concerns of Councillor Barton, which I believe are very well founded, that a further condition in relation to the salvage of the street name plaque and details of the place of safe keeping and storage be submitted and agreed in writing by the developer, so we can keep track on where the precious place sign goes. It is conditioned as part of the scheme of redevelopment that it does have to be reaffixed. So that end of the process is covered, but I'm grateful to Councillor Barton for having raised that. In addition, Chair, to those revised conditions on the amendment sheet, I would like to suggest that condition 7 is actually revised to state the redevelopment of the site shall commence within 12 months following the commencement of demolition to ensure that the site is brought forward as swiftly as possible and not left vacant. So that's a revised wording suggestion, Mr. Chair, to condition 7. to slightly change the wording suggested in the amendment sheet. But thank you again, Councillor Barton.
I'd suggest that with those amendments or additions that we could put it to the vote. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Barton and Councillor McLean. Thank you very much. So all those in favour of the recommendation?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Excellent. So we now come on to the final item, which we have Councillor Oxford and Councillor Dundas to talk to, but we have Mr. Harden. No, we don't, do we?
He will just be coming, Chairman.
Just get myself sorted, Chairman.
Yes, item 5, thank you.
Right, thank you, Chairman. I'll just share my screen. Right, so this application is at the former rugby club at Mill Road. It's for the demolition of the clubhouse and the erection of a new community centre. This is the existing site showing the rugby club building. You'll note vegetation on site, existing access road into the site. And this is the proposed community building. You'll see it's been reorientated a bit so that the front gable is going to look over the new village green. Trees and vegetation will be retained. There'll be a small sort of outdoor cafe area and refuse and collection areas and manoeuvring spaces. This is an aerial view of the current site. So that's the rugby club building to the top of the site there. See some vegetation, then already an access and parking manoeuvring spaces around here, hard surfacing. Note the proximity of dwellings along here, the bottom of the site. This is a view of the proposed building. So it's a fairly sharp contemporary building with a dark blue finish for the roof and the first floor, and then a buff brick is proposed. I think that's quite an attractive combination, to be honest. Fenestration will avoid overlooking of neighbouring properties. You'll see the flank or the side elevation here hasn't got any first floor windows, and the rear elevation will be obscure glazed up to a certain 1.7 metre height. These are just internal plans if you want to look at those in more detail when we discuss the scheme. And that's the first floor. And that's just another line drawing of the proposal. So I'll go back to the layout. while I consider the planning issues. So in terms of planning considerations, you'll note from the report that the scheme accords with local plan policy and emerging local plan policy and the master plan for the CNG area. So in terms of detailed planning considerations, we consider the design, scale and form is acceptable in this context and would actually represent an improvement compared to what exists on site. Existing rugby club building is a bit dilapidated and a bit dated, to be fair, at the moment. So I think this will represent a substantial visual improvement. In terms of impact on neighbouring amenity, the building is considered to be far enough away from neighbouring properties to avoid an overbearing impact, and also there would not be overlooking owing to the orientation of openings, obscure glazing, and also intervening vegetation. So we don't think there'll be a loss of light either, so it's considered to be appropriate in terms of detriment, no detriment to neighbouring residential amenity. The parking manoeuvring areas are generally well away from neighbouring property as already exists. And in terms of parking manoeuvring, there's considered to be adequate space within the site to provide for people serving the building, using the building. And it's a very similar provision to what exists on the existing hard surfaced area, which is now going to be the village green. That brings us to tree impact. Generally, all vegetation and trees will be avoided. There is some revision required in the area just here, if you can see my cursor, just to make sure that parking manoeuvring areas do not go too close to the root protection areas of trees. So there will be a slight revision to this area here, and we're waiting the applicant to actually provide a revised plan just for that area there. Subject to that, our tree officer will be happy with the scheme overall. So I'll take you to the recommendation now, which is authority to approve subject to a minor revision to some hard surfacing in this area here. Just on the point of one condition, a slight rewording is required on condition 6, the construction method statement. You'll see that we've also got a demolition method statement, so I would want to withdraw the element where it says or works of demolition, because we want two statements. Basically, we've got a statement in outlining demolition, which the applicant is keen to be able to get on with demolition, and then prior to construction we would have an additional method statement as well. So we wouldn't want that one to then limit the demolition as required for under condition 7. So we've got two statements there which should cover any issues relating to demolition and to construction. Thank you, Chairman.
Good, thank you very much, Mr. Harden. I'm just curious, one side that's facing south looks as if it could have solar panels on it. Is that correct?
Yes, they're shown.
Excellent. And now we have a statement from Councillor Dundas first, and then Councillor Oxford would like to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. This is Councillor Dundas' statement. I would like to briefly state that I fully support this application and would urge the committee to approve the permission. The new St Mark's Centre is a significant investment in an area which has seen much growth in population, with considerably more to come, and it is very important we do everything we can to provide community facilities which are fit for purpose. It complies with both the local neighbourhood plan and emerging local plan. It is a community-led design which has come about from long discussions between local stakeholders and ward councillors. It seems to have much support in the community. I hope that the committee can approve the permission unanimously, and the council can then proceed to appointing a contractor and starting work as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Councillor Oxford, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've had to walk a tightrope with this one because obviously the 3 ward councillors on Highwoods have been trying to get the additional facility for the ward for some years, and it's here, but it's always been subject to planning, and we're here tonight. But I thought it would be wrong of me to let this go by without saying a few words. Firstly, I'd like to place on record thanks to Chris Smith. He's the one who's been doing all the work regarding the volunteer trustees, the charitable trustees, and in charge of all the consultations that have taken place and all of the further consultations regarding designs that residents have had an opportunity to feed into, which obviously I've left to them to stay separate to. So he's done an awful lot of work, and I think it should be recognised. Originally, we offered the lease to Marlin Community Council, who refused it. But we felt that it was still opportune for us to offer a seat on the trustees for them. So they have one seat on there. Highwoods Ward councillors' representatives have two, and the rest are made up from other members of the community. The other thing I've asked officers about is there is a community garden, and I've asked if a memorial could go into the garden, because I've been approached this year regarding there is no memorial on Highwoods at all, and it could be a combined memorial, not only for those fallen in conflict, but also for people who have suffered through COVID. So it seems that that's acceptable to officers from the ones I've had a word with, so I'm just saying that perhaps that could be added to. And the final thing is, because this area has been illegally encamped on many times in the last few years, I think bollards at the entrance to the site and the boulevard would be essential to safeguard this and the village green for future. Thank you.
Okay, I think some of those aren't necessarily planning issues, but Councillor Mannion, very short contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to know, there was a question regarding EV charging points in the application. Would they be accessible for 24-hour period, or is this conditional? And if they're not, could they be?
No. I would say they probably wouldn't be, because you'd be leaving the site open for intruders. So there's normally a sort of a gate there which is closed. So, and Councillor Oxford seems to be confirming that that's probably not a good idea, I would say, for site security.
Councillor Mr. Harden, can I just ask you about a memorial? Are you talking about a physical memorial, Councillor Oxford, or a tree?
I've asked for a stone memorial, but with the ward councillors have offered to pay for it. So it's just about including it in the garden, which they seemed quite happy with, the officers. So I'll work with them behind the scenes, because we'll be paying for that. But I just thought I'd raise it whilst it's going through planning, because the garden is included in this permission.
I was just concerned it was going to be another Cleopatra's Needle at the back somewhere.
Chairman, well, it's the first I've heard of the memorial, to be honest, but yes, it is. It sounds a good idea. I mean, we could technically condition it, but obviously if everyone's willing to do it anyway, it might be a bit superfluous, but it is, we could technically put it as a condition. Right.
Could we limit it to, say, 2 meters in height or something like that? Would that be helpful? Just to make sure that it's not excessive, that's all.
Well, we could, Chairman, we could condition it so that details are submitted to us, and then we could agree those. Yep.
As long as that doesn't hold up the demolition and the process.
Yeah, we could put a condition on, Chairman, saying so that it doesn't relate to demolition, they can still demolish, and then before its installation, details submitted. So we require it to be put in, but it doesn't hold up the rest of the development. Is it? Okay, yeah.
So, subject to those amendments, can we put those to the vote? Can we have a proposer and seconder? I think we'll have Councillor Oxford and Councillor Loveland. Thank you. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Right. All unanimous. Councillor Warnes.
I'd like to raise something after you've passed this planning permission. I would then like to raise something. Thank you.
Can you repeat that, please?
After you've passed this planning permission, I would like to raise something before the meeting is closed.
Well, I believe those are all the items being determined. So, Councillor Warnes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, as a fully paid up member of a trade union, and Unison at that, you would expect me not to let the opportunity pass without raising the temperature within this room this evening, not least because we have got members of staff here and we do have responsibilities as an employer. And I remember sitting in this room with the same coldness back in 2017 at a local plan meeting, and the issue of the temperature was actually raised then. Here we are 4 years later and the problem clearly persists. So could I ask at future meetings that a temperature, a thermometer is on hand so we can monitor the actual temperature, because we have a legal duty not to drop below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. As I really think it looks bad on us expecting staff to sit through cold conditions, and as it's been going on a multiple number of years, we need to address it.
Thank you. As you know, I raised that as an issue before the start of the meeting, but obviously with the COVID restrictions becoming more enforced, then we've got to keep fresh air as well. So it's getting that compromise. So I'm sure the officers will look into it for the next meeting. Thank you. If that's all the business, Mr. Clifford, I will declare the meeting closed.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.